There's a lot of debate on what the best Pokemon generation is. Gen 1 is the game that the most people started off with, and as such, one people have the most nostalgia for. And while it is a great game, if we're going by a modern perspective without any rose-tinted glasses, it definitely wouldn't be viewed as the greatest game in the series with all its flaws and rough edges. Then there's Gen 2, which seems to be the game that the most people consider their favorite, at least if we go by Heart Gold and Soul Silver. It polished the rough edges of Red and Blue and improved upon pretty much every gameplay aspect. It also came out not too long after Gen 1. So it's still pretty nostalgic to that generation, and for a lot, the experience of playing a sequel that completely blew the original out of the water is one that can never be topped. Next came Gen 3. It once again improved upon almost everything, although I don't hear as many people praise it as much as Gen 2 at least, but it's my favorite Pokemon game. After that, there's Gen 4, which I don't see as many people calling it their favorite, but its online play and story were widely praised. Well, I mean, if you count Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I guess it is the most praised generation. But anyway, Gen 5. Gen 5 was the first Pokemon game to be widely unpopular when it came out, and only recently have fans been given the love it deserves. You see, while it did improve upon a crap ton like each previous generation before it, it also made a lot of changes that weren't widely received at the time, but now give the game a very distinct experience than any other in the franchise. Even more bizarre was how it's the first Pokemon game not to have a third version, just two standard editions, Pokemon Black and Pokemon White, and eventually something that hasn't been seen in the series since, a pair of sequels, Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2. A lot of people debate if these count as their own separate games or not, but I'm not here to discuss that today. I actually plan to cover Black 2 and White 2 in their own video someday, and this video will only be about the original Black and White. Without further ado though, let's dive into these games and see what all the fuss is about. And I also, by the way, I broke my old mic, so I had to get a new one, and I'm probably gonna sound a bit different in this video. And I don't have this new mic worked out quite yet, so the audio quality might not be the best. But with that out of the way, let's begin. Just the intro should be a sign that this isn't going to be your typical Pokemon adventure. Instead of the usual happy opening cutscene that shows off new Pokemon and pumps you up, this one is more in line with something you'd see in Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy. It shows what appears to be the coronation of a young boy, and all these strange, out of place looking people for a Pokemon game, but you know what? It's a nice change of pace. So to start off, one thing I will complain about is with save files. You see, you can't overwrite save files, and if you start a new game without deleting the old save file, there's no way to save. And to even delete an old save file, you need to press up, B, and select at the same time, so yeah, that's a bit convoluted. That minor inconvenience is quickly forgiven by me, as when you start a new save file, you see this game's Pokemon professor for the first time. This is Professor Juniper, and do I even need to say anything? She's smoking hot. Not too young, but not too old, incredibly intelligent, doesn't actually exist, you know, just my type. Honestly, Professor Juniper is probably the hottest female character in the series in my opinion, after maybe Cynthia. Yeah, I suspect a few people watching this are probably cringing right now, but I haven't gotten any negative comments about me being thirsty, but I've gotten dozens over my voice and mispronunciations and stuff, so I'm just gonna assume everyone doesn't care. And if you do, well, I'm sorry. I really hate myself. My first aside were then taken to the house of our main character, Hilbert. Not exactly the greatest name for a main character, to be frank, although his female counterpart's name is Hilda, which sounds a bit less stupid. Today though is the day that the protagonist and their friends get their first Pokemon. These two friends are your rivals. Yeah, that's right, you get two of them in this game. First, there's Chirin. He's the smarter, more experienced of the two, already knowing a lot about the world of Pokemon. Chooses the starter that's super effective against yours, overall being a more serious rival, closer to Blue or Silver. His character arc revolves around finding his purpose and meaning of what being the strongest entails besides being the best. The second of the two, Bianca, is just as much of a newbie as Hilbert/Hilda. She picks a starter that's weak to whatever the player chose, and after May/Brandon, is the first friendly ally kind of rival. I mean, Barry was kind of that too, but she's just adorable. Her start of battle sprite has her struggling to get her Pokeballs out of her bag, she gets her Pokemon stolen, she's just too precious for this cruel world. Or the world of Pokemon, because it's not real. Just like my chances of getting a girlfriend. Her dad, on the other hand, doesn't like the idea of her going on a Pokemon journey, coming to stop her mid-journey, and the two have an emotional moment together. Now, what separates these two from the later rivals, and why I think they're the last awesome rivals in the series, is their well-written personalities and their part in the story. Speaking of which, this game's story is excellent. More on that later though. Sometimes we'll be helping the player get back some stolen Pokemon, and at others they'll be racing for the next gym badge. It's never a dull moment running into one of them. It's worth noting too that all three of them are 14. Quite a bit older than the standard 10 or 11 most protagonists are. In my opinion, Sheeran and Bianca, again, are the last excellent rivals in Pokemon. Sure, I do like some of the later ones, but they're all either too one-dimensional or have very little screen time. Sheeran and Bianca though add a lot to the story, have well-written personalities with character development, and even come back in a sequel with new roles. The region of this game, Unova, was the first one to take place in a place other than Japan, being based off United States, specifically the East Coast, and more specifically the Mid-Atlantic, and even more specifically New York, and even more specifically the New York City metropolitan area. Yeah, I've heard a lot of differing opinions of where exactly Unova took influence from, but we know New York at the very least for sure. Unova is a beautiful place, with so much grit and aesthetic fluff, and there are a few notable places that I want to take a look at. Castelia City is basically New York City, being the largest city of the region and possibly the largest in Pokemon in general after like Saffron. There are a number of buildings to explore, back alleys, dancers, along with a lot of people. The roads are full of people going about their day. None of them serve any real purpose, but it adds to the big city cheery atmosphere. Driftville City is just cool all around. Nimbasa City is just one big amusement park. The caves are massive and the routes are beautiful. I'd rank Unova pretty high in the ranking of Pokemon regions, probably around 3rd or 4th, although if it wasn't for nostalgia of Kanto, maybe higher. So for the starter Pokemon they're meh, not really having great dual typing, with mediocre stats being a letdown to some. First there's Tepig, the fire type. It evolves into Pignite and then into Emboar. Its later evolutions are dual fire fighting type, which was used twice in a row before as with Blaziken and Infernape. On top of that, it doesn't learn that good of fighting moves and is slow. Nearly every poll I've seen has Emboar at the bottom in popularity, and it's not even close. Slightly more popular, we have Snivy, the grass type starter. Although its evolution is a pretty raw deal compared to the likes of Charmander, who goes from a salamander to a dragon, or the plethora of Pokemon who gain dual typings after evolving. No, Snivy doesn't gain anything during its first evolution to Servine, but during its final evolution to Serperior, the poor thing loses its legs. What, did God curse it for getting people to eat from a tree or something? Despite not having any legs, it has great speed, somehow, but its attack and special attack are pretty bad. This is the starter I chose during my first playthrough of Black a few years ago, while I chose a Tepig line when I played Black 2 a little bit after. And although most polls rank Serperior higher than Emboar, I found Emboar more useful. Maybe it's because my team was overall just better and a lot higher level than Black 2, honestly I don't know. Gen 5's definitive starter is without a doubt Oshawott, which is what I went with for this playthrough. The Oshawott line might not have a dual typing, yet they have a good selection of moves, great stats all around, and their only weakness is speed. Oshawott's appearance changes while evolving, and it's kinda weird too. I mean, not as bad as Snivy. It first evolves into Dewott, which is still an otter-like creature, and then into its final evolution it evolves into Samurai. I mean, what's this thing supposed to be? An otter? A walrus? Who knows? Appearances aside, Samurott is great. Again, this is the line I went with for this playthrough, and now that I've used all 3 of them, yeah, I have to admit that Samurai is probably the best starter in most cases. Now, I could have done what I usually do for these videos, which is use breeding on previous save files to get all the starters, but I decided not to do that this time since I'm planning on doing that again for Black 2 and White 2 whenever I do make a video on that, so stay tuned for that, which is gonna be like 5 years from now, but stay tuned anyway. My other team members are pretty solid overall, which I'm glad of. For a while, I really sucked at building Pokemon teams. I never made sure to have enough type variety, would waste space with HMs, chose terrible Pokemon, and loved moves with 5 PP. It feels satisfying to have such an incredibly better team than I did my first playthrough, although it did take a while for it to come together. It wasn't until like the 3rd gym that I finally got my 2nd party member, not until like the 6th when I had my final team. For these past few playthroughs, I've been trying to fill my team with some underrated Pokemon, or at least ones I hadn't used before. I decided to try Lilligant out because I saw it listed on some online article once about underrated Gen 5 Pokemon, and usually these articles aren't that trustworthy, although this one was right because I really enjoyed using Lilligant. I gave it quite a few moves throughout different points in the adventure besides the cliche high-powered grass moves like Leech Seed, Sleep Powder, Quiver Dance to raise special attack, etc. I'll even say that Lilligant was probably the most fun member of my team to fight with since I had to keep thinking of strategies instead of just spamming Razor Leaf or something. My Ranunculus took a long time to finally get good. For a while, the thing would die in 1 or 2 blows. And in this new tradition that I've come up with recently of naming my psychic types after mother characters, I did it again, this time Lucas. My Archeops became a pretty effective sweeper, as did my Hydreigon. Although this thing takes forever to evolve, like it doesn't reach its first evolution until like level 50 and its final until 64. And my last team member is Chandelure. Dual Ghost Fire, has a sweet design, and I want to eat it for some reason. Those unfamiliar to Black and White might find it an odd coincidence that my whole party are all new to the game, with none from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, or Sinnoh. In what might be the most unpopular decision of Gen 5, for the main story, the player can only catch the new Pokemon of the generation. It's only in the post-game that Pokemon from previous titles can be caught, leaving quite a few fans unsatisfied. On one hand, this limits your options from over 600 to a little over 100 if that. On the other hand, this does make the game feel very distinguished. Sometimes it gets old seeing the same Mons over and over, so a completely new roster for a while is a breath of fresh air. In a way, this might be the closest experience to how 90s kids felt playing Red and Blue for the first time, and all without pretty much any Gen 1 pandering. However, a lot of fans didn't think so deeply about any of this at the time. On top of that, while quite a few of the new Pokemon are great and interesting, there are a lot that aren't, like Vanillite, which is an ice cream cone, Trubbish, actual garbage, and... am I glad this isn't 2020 anymore? One thing I think all of us can agree on, or at least most of us, is just how good this game looks visually. Sprites look very polished, colorful, well detailed, and overall, just aesthetically pleasing. But the graphics aren't quite static in its top-down placement like you'd see in previous games, with a lot of different angles playing with a 3D perspective. In tight spaces, you'll see a lot of close-up shots on characters, while in various routes and cities, they're tiny. It's one of those things you really don't think about too much, yet adds a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised if the camera angles kept players' attention a bit longer. But battles get even better, as for the first time ever, the sprites are fully animated. Each Pokemon have their own animation loops, and once again, the camera angle changes constantly. Even the moves themselves look great, being very well animated and just looking cool. Oh, and we can't forget that rockin' tune that plays when your health's low. Some people find it a bit annoying, and well, it kind of is. At the same time though, it's a great addition. It makes some hard battles feel a lot more tense. Now for the new stuff. And oh boy, is there a lot of it in Black and White. The biggest new aspect, at least at the time of release, might be the Sea Gear. Sometimes the cast uses it to communicate like Zoom, and the rest of the functions, well, I can't really use much of them because either A, they haven't worked since Nintendo shut down DS Wi-Fi, or B, they need other players to communicate locally to work, and I don't have any friends. A concept that never really came back after this game is the season cycle. Now, trying to implement new time-based mechanics besides the day and night cycle are nothing new. Gen 2 tried a weekly cycle, which had its issues. Just being too much and kind of annoying having to wait till certain days of the week to do certain things like find a move tutor. The season cycle, meanwhile, is both a little less annoying and more annoying at the same time. For one, not really much is impacted by it, other than the visuals, with there being 4 seasons, or because there are 4 seasons in the real world, so yeah, I don't know what I was going with in the script. Anyway, you got spring, summer, fall, and winter. It does add a bit of visual variety, and it adds a certain charm similar to the Animal Crossing series. Not only that, but each season doesn't last a whole 3 months, instead only 1, which definitely does make it easier to experience each season in a reasonable amount of time, although it does take away the real world element of the game's season lining up with the players. January, May, and September are spring, February, June, and October are summer, March, July, and November are fall, and April, August, and December are winter. So yeah, they don't really line up too well. The other problem I have with it is just I don't like how certain seasons look, especially winter. However, it is possible to change a season by tweaking the internal clock in the DS. And surprisingly, it doesn't mess up that much, unlike, let's say, Animal Crossing. Overall, the idea of seasons was a cool one, that ended up just not working too well. Another new feature that never appeared ever again in later titles are some new battle types. Double battles were pretty fun, so the devs thought that triple battles would be even better. Only no, they really don't work too well at all. There's too much happening all at once, only the center party member can attack every Pokemon on screen, and it's hard not to have at least one of your Pokemon faint. Speaking of which, that's another thing that gave this game its mixed reception. It can be kind of hard if you're not careful. First off, you can't rebattle trainers, meaning early on there's only a finite amount of money you can get. On top of that, the amount of XP points earned in battles correlates with how strong your Pokemon is. So if you have a high-leveled Pokemon, defeating low-level Pokemon will give less XP than ever before. However, if you're careful of spending money, and don't rotate between tons of different Pokemon, Black and White isn't as difficult as I've seen some claim it to be, at least for the main story. Plus, Nimbasa City has these stadiums full of trainers to fight that can be rebattled once a day, and they also rise in levels as the adventure goes on. Moving back to positive stuff, HMs and TMs have a couple of convenient tweaks. First, the amount of HM moves isn't too bad honestly, only 6. Surf, Fly, Strength, Cut, Waterfall, and Dive, the last 2 of which are hardly ever used. So more like 4. Well, I didn't even have Cut on my team too, so 3, and I didn't really need Strength either, so 2, and you don't technically need Fly, so 1. Way less than in Ruby and Sapphire or Diamond and Pearl, which have like 8. Even better, TMs can be used an infinite amount of times. So if you want to have a whole team of Jigglypuffs and no Psychic, well there you go. Then there's just the small things. Little additions that help add to the experience, like seasoning on a lasagna. Like these doctors and nurses that act as healing points in certain long routes or dungeons to heal your team so you don't have to make the trek to a Pokemon Center. Or weather like snow or rain that relaxes the soul. Or all the stuff in Nimbasa City, like the Pokemon musical. And yeah, I only did it once to get footage for it, but I'm sure there are some people out there who really enjoyed it back in 2011. Gym leaders are another strong point of this game. With unique hacks that each play their own role in the story instead of being fought once and forgotten. There are many times where they actually do their job of protecting Unova and just seem a lot more professional. The first gym is an odd one. You see, instead of just one leader, this one has 3. There's Silent, who uses grass types, Chili, who uses fire types, and Cress, who uses water types. Which one the player fights is determined on what starter they chose, and the gym leader they fight is the one with the type advantage over their starter. Needless to say, this is a pretty intense battle. I remember when I attempted it for the first time a few years ago, I just kept losing over and over. Trying to level up, failing, trying again, and then still losing. What I didn't know at the time is that you can get an elemental monkey from this guy in the Dream Yard, but it also changes depending on what starter you chose. But it'll always be super effective against a gym leader. But after that, these monkeys become almost useless of how much they start sucking. The only other thing I have to say here is that the gym is a restaurant. And that's the thing about many of them in Unova. Instead of being a basic gym-like building with a little gimmick, many of them feel completely different and distinct, which is pretty cool. The next gym leader is Lenora. Her gym is a museum of sorts. She uses normal types and was actually the first black character in the franchise. After her is Berg, one of the few bug-type gym leaders. And out of all of them is the one who's the latest into the game, being third, while most others are first, maybe second. He's still insanely easy though, because most bug Pokemon kind of suck. I mean, I've never used a bug type in these videos so far, for a reason. And a few cool ones you can actually get are usually super hard to get anyway. Anyway, moving back on track, gym leader number 4 is Elisa, an electric type user who's a model in her spare time. Alright, I'm gonna drop a hot take here. I don't find her that attractive. I mean, at least compared to the goddess it's Juniper. I swear, I'm not being serious here. Well, mostly. She kinda kicked my ass too, since I didn't really have anything super effective against her at this point, except for like Arcan, but it's also weak to electric types. And her Pokemon also spam Volt Switch all the time. At the very least, her gym looks pretty cool. 5th up is Clay. This middle-aged dude pretending to be from the Wild West. I mean, come on, no one talks like that. He kind of reminds me of all those rich, upper-class dudes who pretend to be either cowboys or huntsmen whenever they run for public office. Like, stuff like that really pisses me off. This dude uses ground types, and as you can guess, I stomped hard. Following him is my favorite waifu after a professor, the flying type gym leader of Mistralton Gym, Skyla. She is cute, and I'm not gonna dwell for very long to make up for earlier, but seriously, she's cute. Next to last is Bryce, probably the least interesting Unova gym leader. He uses ice types, and the only other interesting thing I can think about regarding him is how in both this game, Gen 4 and Gen 2, they all had ice type gym leaders for assembled gyms, which all came out in the DS in some way. It's too bad Black and White 2 broke this trend. The final gym leader is different between versions actually. In Black it's Drayden, and in White it's Iris. This is like the only one in the whole series that I've actually had to use items during battles with regular trainers. Then immediately afterwards I swept Iris's team in like 4 turns, so quite the letdown. Alright, now that I've gone over nearly every aspect of the game, from the gameplay to the gritty details, there is one I've saved for last. The number one reason why this game is loved by so many. The ingredient that makes it stand out like a sore thumb from other Pokemon installments. The story. Especially the villains, Team Plasma. These guys are fleshed out more than any other evil team, with what seemed like a reasonable idea at first. To free Pokemon from their trainers and let them decide their own fate. For years up to this point, the idea of free will for Pokemon was one of the most debated topics in the community, with the lead writer of the anime even coming up with an idea about a movie about a Spartacus-like Pokemon rebellion. This moral dilemma is brought up multiple times by different characters, each having their own views on the matter. In spite of such a noble goal, Team Plasma isn't behind using similar tactics to that of Team Rocket or Team Galactic, stealing, violence, etc. Above the grunts are the 7 sages, led by Geddes, and above him is their king, N. This dude is a really interesting character. He's encountered quite a few times early on in the game when you have no clue who he really is. N makes remarks about how people and Pokemon must be separated, battles the player a few times, and most importantly, is very mysterious. The reveal is done perfectly too, as it's not this cliche betrayal moment. It takes place halfway through the game after you battle him in Nimbasa Town, and then he takes you on his Ferris wheel, a place where there's no way to get down until the ride's over, meaning that he could pretty much do to you whatever he wants. This whole scene perfectly conveys to the player who N is, while being the least dramatic as possible, and at the same time giving the player a feel of unease. Although I do feel pretty sorry for N with his rough life before the days of Team Plasma. He was raised by wild Pokemon in the woods, creating a deep bond between them and himself. One day, Geddes of the 7 Sages found and adopted him, and even raised him to be their future king. Team Plasma's ultimate plan is to awaken a legendary dragon, and with it, N will defeat the Pokemon League, and people will be forced to free their Pokemon. This dragon changes depending on what version. In black, it'll be a white dragon, Reshiram, and in white, it'll be the black dragon, Zekrom. Her story is interesting, but also kind of confusing. At one point, both of them were the same being, and it was friend to the twin heroes. Both of them had different ideas of what was necessary, with one brother wanting to pursue ideals and the other wanting to pursue truth. And so the dragon split in two, with each of them following one of the brothers. Along the journey, you meet the champion as well, Adler. Out of all the regional champions up to this point, Adler shows up the most and has the biggest impact on the story. Before replaying this, I didn't remember much about him, thinking he was a boring champion. I was wrong though, because he does have a good backstory. Adler at one point was your typical strong trainer, striving to be the strongest until one day when his favorite Pokemon died of illness. Ever since, he's been roaming Unova out of grief. After the 7th gym, N awakens Reshiram in Dragon Spiral Tower. However, N actually wants to prove his point, challenging Hilbert to find Zekrom and meet him in battle. Then he disappears for a while. You're then given a Dark Stone, which is all that remains of Zekrom, and then things go quiet for a while without any incidents. That is until after the 8th gym, where there's only one place left to go, the Pokemon League. Unova's Victory Road is one of the better ones, since instead of having it be one large cave, it's on a mountain full of entrances and exits, slopes to slide down to lower levels, a doctor to heal, stuff that spices things up as well as being less annoying. Moving on, we have a top tier Elite Four, starting with Chantal. Well, not actually, because you can fight them in any order in this game, but I fought her first, and most people do. She's a ghost type user, as well as a bookworm. Her room looks awesome too. Next is Grimsley, who uses dark types, then Catalin, who uses psychic types, and lastly Marshall and his fighting types. All in all, it's one of the easiest Elite Fours. In a champion's room, N soundly defeats Adler to become the new Pokemon champion. First time I played this, I kind of assumed you beat N here and that's that. Oh boy, was I wrong again, because the devs took this to 11 here. Team Plasma literally built a castle beneath the league, that rises from the ground to engulf the area. Talk about an idea. I guess if it works for Bowser, it'll work for anyone. N challenges Hilbert to a final battle in the castle to prove once and for all who's right. This castle is just gorgeous, massive, and sets the tone. Again, it's not really something you expect to see in Pokemon. In a lot of ways, the endgame kinda reminds me more of a Mother or Paper Mario game. There's even an awesome moment where 6 of the 7 sages come to stop you, but the gym leaders come in to fend them off so you can go ahead. And there's also this really messed up scene in the manga where it shows them getting crucified, so yeah, that's fucked up. Thankfully, there aren't any fights against any Team Plasma members here. Instead, they just have some tidbits of information and some dialogue, suggesting that even they have doubts of their plan. Conveniently, it's also possible to leave and come back, so in case you need to grind, no worries. Strangest of all is N's room. Oh boy, if there is one spooky location in the series it's overlooked, it's this. N grew up here, surrounded by toys, some of which are fairly new, meaning that despite being 20 or so, he still plays with them. The sole purpose of this room is to show that N isn't exactly normal, and the music is perfect. The song has this nursery rhyme nostalgic feel, along with this unsettling, something's not quite right vibe. It's nothing compared to what it was in Black 2 and White 2 though, that's some nightmare fuel right there. At long last comes the final battle. N summons his dragon, which causes the player's stone to react, bringing the other legendary back to life, in my case Zekrom. To proceed, it needs to be caught. Sounds annoying and maybe a bit nerve-wracking, and it would be if their capture rate wasn't so high. These guys are the easiest legendaries to capture of all time. All it took for me was like one quick ball. With it caught, you get the option to send one of your team members to the PC to make room for Zekrom/Reshiram, and unless you grind a lot, you'll probably need it. N is tough. with the main obstacle being his dragon. Either have something that knows Ice Beam, or use your dragon of your own to take it out. Off the top of my head, I think this is the only trainer battle that I can think of at least, between two legendaries. Add on top of that all the build-up, and this might be the most excited I've been during a Pokemon battle. Once N's dragon is taken out, things get a lot easier, with the only real annoying thing left is his Zoroark and its illusion. The rest of his team have a lot of variety in typing, have strong moves, the whole shebang. After N's defeat, his dreams are shattered, admitting that he was wrong. The struggle isn't over yet though, as we get the icing on the cake, that is the final chapter, the reveal of Geddes' true role and intentions. The whole motivation of Pokemon Liberation was nothing more than a farce. Instead, Geddes is the true mastermind behind everything, with the purpose of Team Plasma being indeed to free Pokemon, but only so Team Plasma could be the only ones with them. Also, to add to N's backstory, when Geddes raised him, he only allowed abused Pokemon around him to sour his opinion of people, along with a lot of other possible child abuse. Most of all verbal abuse, as demonstrated right here. To further show off how evil this guy really is, he legit plans on killing the main character, plain and simple, making the battle of him a literal life and death situation. Geddes is even stronger than N, with an OP Buffalint that took out more of my team than I'd like to admit. His Pokemon have so much coverage over so many types, making it hard to corner him with a super effective type. Needless to say, I had to use some of my Hyper Potions and rely on Zekrom for this fight. After Geddes is beaten, he and the 7 Sages are put under arrest, and N has had his whole world turned upside down. His whole worldview has been proven wrong, his kingdom collapsed, and everything he strived for has amounted to nothing. N talks about how he started having doubts of his plan as soon as seeing Hilbert's bond with his Pokemon. With a whole new uncertain future ahead of him, he thanks the player for everything, and leaves to find his own meaning. Then the credits play. Yeah, that's the end. Very different, that's for sure. Plot twist was great. Legendary dragons, the build-up, the atmosphere, everything was great. However, this is only really the halfway point in the journey, as there's a beast of a post-game left. First off, there are tons of new routes and areas that can now be accessed, with loads more trainers to battle. Yeah, you're seeing this right, most of these trainers are above level 60. That is an insane level jump, possibly the most I've seen in a game ever. Yet most of these trainers are just stupid, having unevolved Pokemon with weak moves, and since this game has a system where the weaker you are, the more XP points you get, it doesn't take that long to grind up to their level. Wild Pokemon as high as the level 60s exist as well, so if you run out of trainers to fight against, well, I guess you wouldn't because, there's the stadiums in the Bassa City and all that, but, in the meantime, you can find wild Pokemon to fight against. Of course, it does suck not being able to use repels to avoid random encounters for a lot of it. Also, these routes are the ones where most of the mons from previous generations can be found. Better late than never, I guess. On the plus side, since these wild Pokemon are high leveled, at least if you want to make a last minute change to your team, you can do it without having to grind it up. The biggest side quest of the post game involves tracking down the other 6 Sages. A few are on the new routes, while others hide in locations previously visited. A good chunk of the Sages regret their decisions, give out TMs, and help the police out with their investigation. To be frank, this quest feels kind of anticlimactic and incomplete. Then of course are the other legendaries, quite a few of which can even be fought before the Elite Four. I just didn't put in the script because it didn't really fit too well. The first one that can be caught is Cobalion in Mistralton Cave, then Virizion in Pinwheel Forest, then in Victory Road, Terrakin. The trio helped end a war years ago, don't really like humans, and are frankly just filler legendaries. Moving on, in the Great Chasm is a third legendary dragon Pokemon, Kyurem. Fun fact real fast, originally a third version of Gen 5 was planned to be made, most likely with the title Pokemon Gray. This idea though was scrapped for a number of reasons, mostly because of how the main theme of these games is the struggle between two forces and ideas, so a third version would be hard to make. Most likely Kyurem would have been the box legendary of Gray if it was ever made, so poor thing. Well, it does come back for Black and White too, albeit with a different role and color, but I'll tackle that in my Black 2 White 2 video. If you've watched any of my other Pokemon videos, you know how much I utterly despise roaming legendaries. And thank God this mechanic got polished so much in this game. For one, there are only two roamers, Thundurus and Tornadus. Each of them can only be caught in one version of the game, Tornadus in black and Thundurus in white. Because of this, you can save hours constantly tracking them down and just use your Master Ball. But even if you don't want to use your Master Ball, catching them is still easier. You can use the bulletin boards to track them down. They stay in one spot for quite a while, and there are visual indicators pointing out where they are. Without a doubt, among the best changes made to the gameplay formula. Thank you for not making me waste 6 hours of my life, Gen 5. If you happen to have both copies of the game, and then trade one of the roamers over to the other, there's one more legendary that can be caught at the Abundant Shrine, Landorus. He too was very easy to catch, and no, I'm not complaining. Well, that's it for almost everything, except for a few small things here and there I'll briefly mention. I actually went out of my way to get a complete Pokedex, and for all my hard work I got nothing, except for Professor Juniper's respect, which is the greatest reward I could ever ask for. A new city in the postgame varies on the version, with Black being home to Black City, while White is home to White Forest. In Black City there are shops to buy items and a lot of trainers that can be battled daily. White Forest, on the other hand, has many exclusive Pokemon from other generations that can only be caught here. However, both of them are ruined by a fatal flaw. The more playtime you have, the less stuff that's available, and if you change the internal clock, that speeds up the process. Why on earth they decided to have it be like this is beyond me. All that's left to do now is to take on Elite Four again, and one last ever challenge. For both of these, you need to grind like crazy to even stand a chance. Thankfully, there are tons and tons of ways to get stronger. There's stadiums in Ambassa City full of trainers to defeat daily, Chirin and later Bianca can be refought daily, there's this house full of a high-level Pokemon family, and trainers that can also be refought daily, tons and tons of high-leveled wild Pokemon, and if you're playing Black, you might be able to refight trainers in Black City. All of them are much higher leveled this time, all in the 70s, so try to get your team around the high level 60s before attempting this, unless you plan on just spamming fuller stores the whole time. Once the Elite Four are beaten for a second time, Adler can finally be fought. I was expecting to have a hard time in this battle like I did with Cynthia and Steven before, but in all honesty, this was pretty easy. My Chandelore's Overeat was able to knock out like 3 of his Pokemon before they could even do anything. Samurott took his Dragadoon out with just a couple of Ice Beams, and Volcarona with Acrobatics. So the only Pokemon of his that took any real teamwork to beat was Bouffalant, and even that went down pretty quick. An anticlimactic victory, although I am very happy that I finally got around to beating him this playthrough. Things still don't end there though. I promise they do soon, okay? Just hold out a little bit longer. Anyway, in Undella Town, a certain champion can be found just sitting in a house, ready to be the last challenge. While she might not have any kind of role in the story, which is probably for the better, it's nice that Cynthia got to come back. Her team, while very similar to what it was in Platinum, has a few new additions, like a Bravery and Electros. Most similar of all is how her Garchomp is a pain in the ass. Its strongest move is Dragon Rush. It does a crap ton of damage, so to compensate, it only has 75% accuracy. Well, guess how many times it hit me? Every single time before it ran out of PP, so yeah, I really don't feel bad about spamming items here. Well, that was an adventure. It's been emotional, unique, long, charming, and a lot of fun. I love the characters, the rivals, the villains, and everything it did to stand out from the bunch. While it wasn't exactly popular when it came out, recently Black and White have finally gotten the praise they deserve, being seen as among the best games in the series. It's definitely worth checking out if you skipped over it, although it is fairly pricey, going for almost $100 nowadays. That's nothing though compared to what Black 2 and White 2 go for. Those games cost like almost $150 for just a cartridge alone. Speaking of which, like I said earlier, I do have plans to cover it someday. Not anytime soon, because while I do view that Black and White and Black 2 and White 2 as being different games, not just a standard third version, they are incredibly similar to each other, and for the moment, I'm a little tired of Unova, so instead, next time we'll move ahead to the next generation, Pokemon X and Y. I hope to see you all then, everyone.